day, my friends. It's just so swell to see you again. I'm so honored that you keep coming back for more education on menopause in general and ovarian cancer in particular. Never did I expect women to gravitate to this education the way you have. It's very swell indeed that you're here. It's so swell that it's enough to keep my heart swelling with pride. Obviously, I'm using the words swell and swelling because they pertain to this tutorial. It's entitled From Swell to Swellings, the many ways in which your ovaries can misbehave. Thus far, in our ovarian cancer unit, you learned about the normal anatomy and functions of your ovaries. Now we're ready to move into discussions on the abnormal anatomy and malfunctions of your ovaries. So this video will be an overview. I will not dwell on any specific kind of ovarian abnormality. It will cover both non-cancerous and cancers. The goal is to show you the range of ovarian abnormalities. Because the chapter on ovarian cancer begins with ovarian cancer itself, you will not find this overview in my book, regardless of whether you have the first edition or the second edition. So you're going to need to watch this video for this big picture perspective. For the title of this video, I chose to make a play on the words swell and swellings because abnormalities of your ovaries involve enlargements of your ovaries. Every ovarian abnormality involves an increase in the size or a swelling of your ovary. But all swellings are not the same. Some are actually normal. Others are abnormal. Some are fairly insignificant. Others are extremely significant. There are even different terms for the various kinds of ovarian swellings, even though they all constitute swellings. One term is cyst. An ovarian cyst is an enlarged pouch in or on an ovary. Another term is mass. An ovarian mass is a growth in or on an ovary. Another term is tumor. An ovarian tumor is a collection of cells in or on an ovary. While these various terms may imply one kind of situation over another, they are not specific to any of them. And most of these terms are commonly used interchangeably. So this topic of the various ways in which your ovaries can swell is somewhat confusing. But the confusion comes from overlapping classification systems rather than complicated concepts. So I will simplify this by condensing the information and pointing out overlaps. As usual, whenever there are classifications, it's best to make some kind of visual aid in order to organize the information. So I'll be making two visual aids for you. A flow sheet as we go along, and a chart once we've covered everything. All right, let's begin with the simplest distinction of all for ovarian swellings. Normal versus abnormal. Right there, you see that sometimes an ovarian swelling is normal, whereas other times it's not. And if you think about the three terms I just gave you for ovarian swellings, some are more commonly considered normal, whereas others are more commonly considered abnormal. So let's begin our flow sheet with this simple distinction between a normal swelling of your ovary and an abnormal swelling of your ovary, and we'll use the most common terms for each one of them. The flow sheet so far depicts two categories of ovarian swellings. Normal, called cysts, and abnormal, called masses or tumors. I know thus far our flow sheet is just pitiful, but give it time. It will become much more interesting and very useful shortly. The reason our first distinction is normal versus abnormal is because your ovary can swell in the process of performing its normal functions. In the last 3 videos, you learned that your ovaries are egg and hormone factories. In carrying out their functions of producing eggs and hormones, your ovaries can sometimes form a swelling in the process. For example, in video number 414, you learned that during your premenopausal life, your ovaries take turns maturing 1 egg for ovulation. And you discovered in video number 415 that your ovary can produce a normal ovulatory cyst in the process of preparing to release that mature egg. Looks like this. An ovulatory cyst is nothing but a mature egg surrounded by fluid. After the egg spews out into your fallopian tube, the ovulatory cyst will resolve spontaneously. The name of the bed where the 1 egg matured is called a follicle. And sometimes the follicle itself forms a cyst in the process of ovulating that 1 egg. When this happens, that cyst is called a follicle cyst. So a follicle cyst is a cyst that forms in the bed where the 1 ovulated egg matured. It's temporary and usually resolves in just a couple of days. But because it forms as a result of the normal process of ovulation and because it resolves spontaneously, it's normal. So it's a swelling inside the ovary that lingers for a few days after ovulation occurs. That's all. In video number 414, you also learned that once that ovulated egg has left your ovary and moved into your fallopian tube, the follicle becomes a corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum produces progesterone to support pregnancy. Well, sometimes the corpus luteum can form a cyst. In that case, it's called a corpus luteum cyst. So a corpus luteum cyst is a cyst that produces progesterone in the hope of supporting a pregnancy. It's temporary though. If you don't get pregnant, it resolves after about 10 to 12 days. If you do get pregnant, it resolves when the placenta takes over the job of producing progesterone. And once again, because it forms as a result of a normal process, and because it resolves spontaneously, it's normal. Then, in video number 416, you learned that one of the normal kinds of cells on the inside of your ovary is called a gonadal stromal cell. It's the kind of cell that produces hormones. Well, it just so happens that in the course of pumping out hormones, it too can form a cyst. This kind of cyst is called a gonadal stromal cyst. A gonadal stromal cyst is a cyst formed by the hormone-producing cells of your ovary. But it's usually temporary and resolves spontaneously, just like the other two. That makes it yet another normal ovarian swelling because it forms as a result of a normal process and it resolves spontaneously. So the category of swellings that are called cysts are mostly normal, functional cysts. They come and go and usually cause no problems whatsoever. And they include ovulatory cysts, follicle cysts, corpus luteum cysts, and gonadal stromal cysts. And there's yet another characteristic of normal ovarian cysts. They all contain clear fluid. But we have a special term for cysts that are filled with clear fluid. And that term is simply simple. Simple cysts are normal cysts that are filled with clear fluid. So this is a test tube that represents a simple cyst. As you can see, the contents of this test tube is completely clear, like water. There's no color and no debris. So normal cysts are simple cysts, and we'll add that to our flow sheet. Now you see that the 4 kinds of normal functional cysts are ovulatory cysts, follicle cysts, corpus luteum cysts, and gonadal stromal cysts, and they are all simple cysts. And there's yet another common characteristic among all normal simple cysts. They are all benign. So let's expand our flow sheet a bit more, incorporating this particular distinguishing feature of normal ovarian swellings. So the normal ovarian swellings are simple, both literally and figuratively. The whole category is limited to cysts that develop in the normal functions of your ovaries. And they are all simple, benign cysts. Now, we move on to abnormal swellings of your ovaries. Obviously, these are the swellings that are not associated with the normal function of your ovary, and they typically do not resolve spontaneously. Unlike what you just saw with normal ovarian swellings, the category of abnormal ovarian swellings is not simple. Instead of all abnormal ovarian swellings being due to normal functions of your ovaries, these are due to some kind of pathology. And instead of all abnormal swellings being similar in terms of their contents, they contain a wide variety of substances. The substance in an abnormal ovarian swelling depends on what accumulated in order to form the swelling. Sometimes it's a normal substance in the wrong location. Other times it's an abnormal substance altogether. Sometimes it's one substance. Other times it's more than one substance. Sometimes it's benign. Other times it's malignant. So let's discuss the various possible contents of abnormal swellings in comparison to the clear, fluid contents of normal, simple, functional cysts. There are several terms for describing the contents of abnormal swellings. Some of them overlap a bit, making distinctions between them a bit murky. Actually, murky is a good word to describe most of their contents. But let's discuss the easiest one first. It's the one that is the exact opposite of a simple cyst. It's a solid mass or solid tumor. Simple cysts contain clear fluid. Solid masses or solid tumors contain solid material with no fluid. So a solid ovarian swelling contains only solid material. Here I have a test tube showing you that. And so you see here that there's no fluid, it's solid. Almost looks like little rocks in there, or coal. In keeping with the theme of density that you've seen in so many previous units on other diseases, I guess you could say that solid ovarian swellings are dense. So you have the simple, normal ovarian swelling and the solid, abnormal ovarian swelling. But between simple and solid, there are all sorts of other contents. These are either homogeneous or heterogeneous. A homogeneous ovarian swelling contains a uniform substance throughout the entire swelling that has a consistency somewhere between liquid and solid. It may be thin or thick in consistency, but it is not clear in color. It may be like this, with fluid that is still detectable as fluid and still fairly thin, but not clear. Or it can be like this, with very thick fluid that is not clear. It's still fluid, you can see it moving, but oh my gosh, it's just sludging its way. Either way, you can see that the contents are homogeneous in both of these. What differs is how thick the contents are. So both of these are homogeneous. There's only one single substance in each test tube. That's what homogeneous means. The alternative to a homogeneous ovarian swelling is a heterogeneous ovarian swelling. Heterogeneous means that there is more than one substance in the swelling. It may contain both liquid and solid material. It may contain more than one kind of liquid material, or more than one kind of solid material. Another word for describing a heterogeneous ovarian swelling is the word complex. Complex is the opposite of simple. So instead of being a simple, clear, fluid-filled ovarian swelling, a complex or heterogeneous ovarian swelling contains a variety of substances. So here, I have a test tube depicting the contents of a complex or heterogeneous ovarian swelling. I mean, what isn't in here? I mean, there's some liquid. There's liquids of different colors. Some are thick, some is thin. There's solid components, different kinds of solid components, and all sorts of things in between. There's some thin fluid, some thick fluid, some solid components, some debris, all here in the same tube. And this same mishmash of things can be present in an ovarian swelling. So if we add this all to our flow sheet, it begins to look a little more complicated. So now you see that in contrast to normal, functional, simple cysts, abnormal masses and tumors are either homogeneous or heterogeneous or solid. But notice that I have not designated all these abnormal ovarian swellings as malignant on our flow sheet. So where does the difference between benign and malignant fit in? Well, that is the tricky part. Everybody's familiar with the basic distinctions between the definitions of benign versus malignant tumors in other parts of the body. A benign tumor is confined to the organ of origin, has well-defined borders between the abnormal cells and the normal cells, is slow-growing, and is treatable with surgery alone. A malignant tumor is not confined or will not stay confined to the organ of origin, does not have well-defined borders between the abnormal cells and the normal cells, is not slow-growing, and is not treatable with surgery alone. But when it comes to ovarian swellings, it's not that simple. With ovarian swellings, these distinctions become blurred or murky. So instead of the typical distinctions, anything is possible. A swelling that is confined to the ovary can be benign or malignant. A swelling with well-defined borders between the abnormal cells and the normal cells can be benign or malignant. Slow-growing ovarian swellings can be either benign or malignant. Fast-growing ovarian swellings can be either benign or malignant. And surgery alone may suffice for either benign or malignant ovarian swellings. In essence, ovarian swellings break all the rules. And there's even a third category that falls between benign and malignant. Have you ever heard of a borderline ovarian mass? Or, in our terminology, a borderline ovarian swelling? A borderline ovarian swelling is one that contains malignant cells that have not invaded the surrounding tissues. Oh my! Where else have you heard that kind of description? You heard it in the unit on breast cancer. It constituted the definition of carcinoma in situ of the breast. And you learned that the basic requirement of all cancers is invasion of surrounding tissues. Because there has been no invasion of the surrounding tissues, carcinoma in situ of the breast is a pre-cancer. And that's essentially the same thing here. A borderline ovarian mass or tumor is one that contains cancer cells that have not yet behaved like cancer cells. We commonly use another label for borderline ovarian swellings. We call them ovarian tumors of low malignant potential. In other words, they are unlikely to ever become malignant. So ovarian tumors of low malignant potential are borderline swellings that contain cancer cells that have not yet behaved like cancer, will most likely never behave like cancer, and are unlikely to become malignant. So this means that for ovarian swellings, instead of just 2 categories, there are 3 categories for how cancerous they are: benign, borderline, and malignant. The complicated thing about these 3 categories with regard to ovarian swellings is that anything goes. In other words, regardless of the contents of the swelling, it can be benign, borderline, or malignant. So we end up with every combination of possibility. And this makes our flow sheet look really complicated. So now I've added the designations of borderline and malignant next to the designation of benign. But I've also drawn lines showing that homogeneous, heterogeneous, and solid ovarian swellings can all be benign. And homogeneous, heterogeneous, and solid ovarian swellings can all be borderline. And homogeneous, heterogeneous, and solid ovarian swellings can all be malignant. So a homogeneous ovarian swelling can be benign, borderline, or malignant. A heterogeneous complex ovarian swelling can be benign, borderline, or malignant. And a solid ovarian swelling can be benign, borderline, or malignant. However, generally speaking, the more solid the swelling, the more likely it is to be malignant. So more density is not better here. And the more heterogeneous or complex the swelling, the more likely it is to be malignant. If you're not a big fan of flow sheets, you can depict all of this in a chart too. Here in the first row, you see the two categories of ovarian swellings, normal versus abnormal. In the second row, you see the terminology used for these two categories. Functional cysts for the normal ones, and mass or tumor for the abnormal ones. In the third row, you see the four specific entities I described for the functional cysts: ovulatory cyst, follicle cyst, corpus luteum cyst, and gonadal stromal cyst. There are none listed for the abnormal columns because there are more than you can possibly imagine, and their names would be enough to make you throw tomatoes at the screen. In the fourth row, you see that the four possibilities for the contents of any given ovarian swelling are fluid, homogeneous, heterogeneous, which is also called complex, and solid. In the fifth row, you see the cancerous potential of each, with normal swellings being benign and anything goes for all the others. In the sixth row, you see the tendency for malignancy of each, with the tendency for malignancy increasing the more solid the swelling. The flow sheet and the chart are your summary. As usual, you can find them via the link in the description box or at menopausetailor.me. And now you have an idea of what a huge topic this is. Don't expect me to address all the different kinds of ovarian cancers. That is just way beyond the scope of what you need. Instead, I'm going to zero in on the one that is most common. It's the one with which you are most familiar, and it's the one that generates the most fear. And we'll start delving into that next week. So that's the end of our session today. You should definitely subscribe to this YouTube channel before you leave today. And while you're at it, subscribe to my newsletter too. And you can go to Facebook, Instagram, Stories, TikTok, Twitter, all of those if you want to follow me. And you can go to menopausetailor.me to schedule a consultation on anything your heart desires. Class dismissed. Bye.